Hi everyone, it's Chaplain Adam Siegel, here to share a few words of Torah from this week's Parsha. So we're starting with the last book of the Torah, Deuteronomy. This week's Torah portion, Devarim, in Hebrew, means words. And spoiler alert, the story's over. The last book of the Torah is basically a recap with a little bit of narrative. So we have Moses speaking in front of the people, speaking words, which is where the name comes from, and beginning a series of speeches, in some of the last days of his life. He begins his first speech very eloquently, which is a change from the Moses that we first met at the burning bush many chapters and many years before. Speaking very eloquently, and starts off somewhere along the lines of reminding the Israelites of where they came from. This includes reminding them of the moment at Mount Sinai. But interestingly, there's a verse that he uses, there's a line that he uses to describe that moment that caught my eye. So he shares that at Mount Sinai, at this moment of revelation, shortly afterwards, he relays that God had told them, the Israelites, that they had stayed too long and that they needed to go. And I was curious because if you look back to Exodus, back a few hundred pages in the book or so, there's no mention of that. There's no mention that they had dawdled, that they had lingered. So it's not clear where that came from. So I was intrigued. And I'm thinking of the timing of this verse and also the timing of the year. And this Torah portion comes always on the week right before Tisha B'Av, which is traditionally the low point of the Jewish calendar. It's a moment of sad and somber reflection about the devastation that our community has experienced over many, many generations. It's also a low point or a bottom in which we start building up over the next almost 2 months, looking towards the high holidays. Well, it's a bottom spiritually, and it's also a moment of rebound that we're moving forward. So one of the reasons I'm thinking that this verse stands out is even though the Israelites experienced the moment at Sinai, not knowing that they were lingering too long, or not knowing what exactly what was in God's mind and Moses' mind at the point, that Moses now 40 years later is able to share and says, "Oh, you thought this was your experience at the time, but really you were fighting, you were trying to figure everything out. This was very early on in your recovery, but you needed to get going, not just because you were dawdling, but because there was a goal to get to. God wanted the Israelites to move on, wanted them to end up in the promised land." And so I think the placement of this verse here is also a short reminder. It's a short intervention to help us remember and say in our reflections, in the beginning preparations of where we might be thinking over the next weeks and months ahead, of moments over the past year where we may have stayed too long, not knowing it at the time, but having the gift of some time and separation to reflect back and recognize and learn from that, and recognize that there might be people in our lives who are able to help guide us or help lend that perspective, and able to draw from that in the work and our preparations, looking towards the holidays and beyond. Shabbat Shalom.